Along Mexico's Pacific coast, there once existed one of the hollowest, most perfect waves on Earth. Longer and rounder and more refined than even the famous cicatella in Puerto Escondido. To some, the break was the best wave in the country, if not the world. But then, it disappeared. A once perfect wave that transformed into an unrideable closeout. How did a wave this good not just get worse, but disappear altogether? In the late 60s and early 70s, it was a wave you had to find by yourself, and one that took considerable effort to get to. But if you were willing to explore and put in the time to score it, you could score the best tubes of your life with no one out. There are a few different accounts of how this wave was actually discovered. You know, there's some pretty vague stories of who was actually the first to surf it, but it's said that a few Californian surfers found the wave while exploring this particular area of Mexico at different times, and was kept a closely guarded secret by anyone who happened to stumble across it. You know, there are a few surfers traveling through this area during this period, but most missed it altogether. A few stopped for a bit of a closer look, and fewer still ever actually paddled out there. You know, the wave was no joke. While perfect, the wave was heavy and scary, capable of holding solid 10 to 12 foot swells that were frequent during the season. So some surfers, even having found it and checked it, drove off in search of finding something more forgiving. Over the following years, a tight-knit group of expats dedicated themselves to riding the wave and posted up at the beach with big boards, riding solid, perfect A-frame tubes with no one out for weeks, even months on end. PETA was one of the best beach breaks that ever was. When PETA worked, it was better than Puerto Escondido could ever be, recalled surfer Jose Barrero in an online forum dedicated to the spot's memory. Initially, stories of the wave's perfection spread slowly. You know, this was in the age, but way before social media, so you kind of had to know somebody who'd been there, or you'd occasionally hear stories of someone who knew someone who went there, and then the story was either played down or just enhanced beyond belief. So it was mostly by word of mouth among surfers traveling along the Mex 200. And Petacalco's remoteness protected itself from anyone finding it. Now, the small town adjacent to the break, Lazaro Cardenas, wasn't on anyone's radar as a surf trip destination. You know, it was a sleepy, run-down fishing town that no one really wanted to go to. And for a brief window in time, the wave was surfed only by a handful of adventurous souls, keeping hush about the wave's exact location. There's a wicked article that was published in the Surfer's Journal. I'll leave the link down in the description where you can find it online. That's a really cool story of a few of the sessions and happenings that went on out there, and yeah, it's a really cool read, so I'll throw that down in the description. But eventually, a couple of surfers from outside that pack stumbled upon the break a few years later on their way back from Central America. And a photo of the break actually appeared on the cover of Surfer magazine. And for the tight-knit crew of surfers who discovered and pioneered the break, this was bad news, as they figured this would inevitably bring the crowds. The location of the break was never named in the feature, and these images actually turned out to be the only ever printed images of the break. Otherwise, only those few who were lucky enough to surf it have old photos, aged film footage, and the stories from the sessions. Unless you were there, the stories will always remain rumours. If you surfed it like back in the day, chuck me a story down in the comments. You know, without the footage and the photos, you never know how exaggerated the stories were or how played down they were, so you can never really get a true account unless you were there. So the break largely remained unknown for years, although it was destined to become famous and rival its cousin to the south, Puerto Escondido. But then the wave stopped breaking. Back then, and for millions of years before that, the Ayotec River, one of Mexico's largest waterways, emptied into the Pacific near PETA. This river carried immense loads of sand and sediment to the coastline, sculpting the sandbanks that shaped the perfect A-frame teepees of Petacalco. In the early 80s, the Mexican government partnered with Japanese investors to transform Lazaro Cardenas into a major industrial hub. The projects included a hydroelectric dam on the Ayotec River that traps massive amounts of sediment upstream, one of the largest steel mills in Latin America, and a port expansion, including jetties that disrupted coastal currents. Now, these interventions all contributed to the death of Petter, starving Petacalco of the precious sand it needed to sustain its sandbars. The precise geometry that created these perfect TP peaks was lost. And without this sand and sediment coming down from the river to replenish the banks, and it turned these beautiful A-frame peaks into an unsurfable closeout. Waves such as Petter rely on specific sand flow to shape their banks, as the sand delivered by the river is pushed out into the lineup, forming shoals that refract and focus incoming swells. So, you know, these sandbanks are crucial in making the wave actually wedge up and peak. You know, without them you just have this flat, shapeless beach, which is what happened to Petter. You know, it went from that really nice groomed sandbank setup to basically just a straight beach with nothing to shape any swell. So once the dam was built, the sand and sediment flow was blocked, and the lack of sand flow killed the wave. Oceanographers studying similar cases note that even minor changes in sediment flow can destroy surf breaks. You know, even just a subtle change in the sand can affect the wave tremendously. And we're seeing cases of this sort of thing happening all over the world, you know, where a jetty's been built or water flow has been blocked and it's killed or affected a wave. And in the late 70s, it's also said that there was a major hurricane that hit Mexico's Pacific coast. This washed a heap of sand away, and without the river running out to replace the sediment, and the banks were washed away, there was nothing to replace them, and the wave just died. Astonishingly, the wave did actually come back to life, temporarily. Its resurrection came in 2013 after extremely heavy rains. It rained so torrentially that the dam upstream had to be opened, and this pushed heaps of rock, sand and sediment back down the river that flowed out onto the beach. And a few lucky surfers were actually able to score a handful of sessions during this time. But since then, the break has been dormant ever since. Now, modern surf guides still list Petter as a surf spot, but it's extremely rare that the place ever breaks. Standing on Petacalco's beach today, it's impossible to imagine the same stretch of Guerrero coast could have hosted a world-class wave. Now it's just a stony closeout. There are some near abandoned hotels that at one time would have hosted travelling surfers, but today they are seldom visited. All that remains of the once great break is the occasional photo and the stories from those lucky enough to surf it. And while Petacalco is now gone, its memory persists, etched in the minds of those who surfed it. The lost wave of Petacalco stands both as legend and as a warning. For a brief moment, it offered perfection in the form of hollow A-frame sandbanks, but then, through human intervention, it disappeared. Got to experience the wave like way back in the day? Please let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. For now, it's goodbye from me, and I'll see you in the next episode.